Imagine watching doctors officially declare a man dead. His heart had stopped beating. The monitor showed a flat line. His family stood in the hallway outside, already bracing themselves to say goodbye. Then, something happened that nobody in that room expected. He came back. His heart started beating again, on its own, with no warning and no explanation. Doctors who had just pronounced him gone were suddenly rushing back to his bedside. His family, moments from grief, were told instead to hope. Everyone in that hospital called it a miracle. But just a few hours later, the same man collapsed again. Same person, same day, 2 deaths. This is not a horror story, and it's not science fiction. It's a real, documented medical phenomenon. One so rare that most emergency doctors will only ever read about it in a textbook, never witness it with their own eyes. Doctors have a name for it. They call it Lazarus syndrome, after the biblical story of a man raised from the dead. But behind that dramatic name is a genuine, unresolved medical mystery, one that forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. What if the line between life and death isn't as sharp or as final as we've always believed? Let me show you exactly how a case like this unfolds. It starts like any ordinary day. A man goes about his usual routine. Nothing about the morning suggests anything is wrong. Then, without any warning at all, his heart simply stops. One moment he is upright, functioning, alive. The next moment he collapses. Someone nearby calls for help immediately. Paramedics arrive within minutes, and they begin CPR straight away, pushing hard and fast on his chest, trying to force blood to keep moving to his brain and organs while his heart refuses to beat on its own. He's rushed to hospital. Inside the emergency department, a full resuscitation team takes over. They deliver chest compressions in relentless cycles. They administer emergency medications through an IV line, drugs designed to restart a stalled heart. They check his heart rhythm again and again, hoping for any sign that it might respond. Minutes pass, then more minutes. In cardiac arrest, every second without circulation increases the risk of permanent damage to the brain. Eventually, after a prolonged and exhausting effort, the medical team reaches the moment every emergency doctor dreads. There has been no response, no pulse, no rhythm on the monitor. According to every clinical sign available to them, this man is dead. The time of death is recorded. The resuscitation team steps back. If the story had ended here, no one would have questioned what happened next. In most hospitals, after CPR is stopped and death is declared, staff don't simply walk away instantly. There's often a short period where the patient remains in the room while paperwork begins and family are informed. It was during a window like this that something extraordinary happened. A member of staff noticed movement, a breath, a pulse, faint but unmistakably there, on a body that had been declared clinically dead only minutes before. This is not folklore. It's a documented and named medical event called autoresuscitation, more commonly known as Lazarus syndrome. The spontaneous return of circulation after CPR has already been stopped and death has already been declared. Doctors first described it formally in the medical literature back in 1982, and by the early 2020s, researchers had cataloged fewer than 100 confirmed cases worldwide, making it one of the rarest events in emergency medicine. The resuscitation team, stunned, moved back into action immediately. Full medical care resumed. Monitors were reattached. The team worked to stabilize a heart that, by every clinical definition just moments earlier, had stopped for good. Outside in the hallway, the family received news they thought they would never get. He was alive. There were tears. There was disbelief. For a brief window of time, it felt as though they had witnessed something close to a miracle. A second chance nobody had dared to hope for. But the real shock hadn't happened yet. For a while, things seemed to stabilize. Vital signs, though weak, were present. The family stayed close, watching every monitor, listening to every beep, allowing themselves to believe that the worst was truly over. Then, without warning, it happened again. His heart stopped a second time. The same emergency response began all over again. Compressions, medication, a team working desperately to bring back a rhythm that had already defied expectations once that same day. This time, despite every effort, there was no second miracle. How can the same person lose their life twice in a single day? It's a question that sounds almost impossible to answer. And yet, in the rare cases where Lazarus syndrome has been documented, this pattern is disturbingly common. Medical reviews of these cases have found that the majority of patients who experience autoresuscitation do not survive long afterward. Many pass away again within hours, some within days. The reason why sits at the very center of this mystery, and it's a question doctors are still working to fully understand. To understand a case like this, we first have to confront a surprisingly uncomfortable truth. Death is not always as instant or as simple as we tend to imagine. Doctors actually recognize several different stages when talking about death. There is clinical death, the point when the heart stops beating and blood stops circulating. There is brain death, a separate and more permanent state involving the total and irreversible loss of brain function. And there is biological death, the point at which the body's cells and tissues begin to break down for good, with no possibility of recovery. In an ordinary cardiac arrest, these stages tend to follow each other closely. But cases of Lazarus syndrome reveal that the gap between clinical death and true biological death can, in rare circumstances, be wider than doctors once assumed. Researchers have proposed several explanations for how a heart might restart after CPR has already stopped. One leading theory involves something called air trapping, or auto-PEEP, where rapid or aggressive rescue breaths during CPR cause air to build up inside the chest. This pressure can actually suppress blood flow back to the heart during the resuscitation attempt itself. Once compressions stop and that pressure releases, blood may suddenly flow back into the heart, allowing it to spontaneously restart. Other proposed explanations include delayed effects of emergency medications, which may take slightly longer to act than doctors expect, dangerously high potassium levels in the blood disrupting the heart's electrical signals, and something doctors call myocardial stunning, where heart muscle temporarily fails to respond even though it is not permanently damaged. The unsettling part is this. Even now, researchers admit they don't have one single, confirmed explanation that accounts for every documented case. The deeper doctors looked into cases like this one, the stranger the story became. This case is rare, but it is not unique. Medical researchers have spent years combing through published case reports from around the world, and by the most recent major review, they had identified around 76 documented cases of autoresuscitation reported in medical journals since 1982, spanning more than 24 countries. These cases involved patients ranging from infants under 1 year old to elderly patients in their 90s. In the reviewed cases, the return of circulation after CPR was stopped typically happened within about 10 minutes, though a handful of extreme outlier cases described a return of life signs after considerably longer. One of the most extraordinary reportedly involving spontaneous recovery nearly 3 hours after resuscitation had ended. Let's look at a few of them. In May 2008, a woman named Velma Thomas from West Virginia suffered a heart attack and was rushed to hospital. Over the following hours, her heart stopped 3 separate times. Doctors could find no measurable brain activity for over 17 hours, the longest clinical death on record for someone who went on to survive. Her family said their goodbyes and began preparing for her funeral. Then, just 10 minutes after she was taken off life support, while nurses were still removing her breathing tube, Velma moved her arm, then her foot. Then she coughed and opened her eyes. In 2014, a Mississippi man named Walter Williams, aged 78, was pronounced dead by paramedics after being found unresponsive at home. His body was taken to a funeral home and placed inside a body bag ready for embalming. It was the funeral director who noticed something impossible. Walter was kicking inside the bag. And it isn't only older cases. In a report published by BMJ Case Reports in 2017, doctors at a Scottish hospital described a 66-year-old man who suffered a cardiac arrest after chest pain. His resuscitation was called off after his condition failed to improve. Staff kept him under observation for a further 5 minutes, standard practice in that hospital. And during that time, his breathing gradually became more regular until a pulse returned on its own. He was later found to have suffered a heart attack, was treated, and was discharged from hospital 9 days later with no lasting brain damage at all. 3 completely different people. 3 different decades, hospitals, and countries. The same impossible pattern. A body declared gone, and then, quietly, it wasn't. If this has happened before, why have so few people ever heard about it? Part of the answer is simply how rare it is. Most emergency physicians will go their entire careers without ever witnessing a single case firsthand, even though surveys suggest a notable percentage of emergency doctors report having encountered it at least once. Because of how uncommon and unpredictable it is, Lazarus syndrome rarely makes headline news, and it's barely discussed outside of specialist medical journals. But its rarity is exactly why each documented case matters so much. Every one of these strange, unexplainable moments adds another small piece to a puzzle doctors are still trying to fully solve, one that could eventually reshape how hospitals define the exact moment a person should be declared dead. Behind every clinical detail in a case like this is a family living through something almost impossible to process emotionally. Imagine being told your loved one has died. Then, within minutes, being told they are alive again. Then, a short time later, being told they have died a second time, on the very same day. Grief researchers and hospital chaplains who work with families in these situations describe it as a uniquely disorienting kind of loss, one where hope and devastation collide, sometimes more than once within just a few hours. Families in documented Lazarus syndrome cases have described the experience as almost impossible to fully process, caught somewhere between relief, confusion, and a grief they were never given time to properly prepare for. For medical staff, too, cases like this can be deeply unsettling. Some emergency physicians who have experienced autoresuscitation describe a lingering sense of doubt afterward. A quiet, uneasy question about whether their initial declaration of death had been made too soon, even though every clinical guideline they followed was correct at the time. It's precisely this discomfort that has pushed some hospitals to reconsider their procedures, recommending a short observation period, often around 10 minutes, after CPR is stopped and before a patient is officially pronounced dead, specifically to rule out cases like this one before families are given devastating news that may not yet be final. But for this particular family, even that would not have changed the outcome. Their loved one's brief return was, in the end, only temporary. One final question, though, still refused to disappear. So what do we actually know, and what do we still not understand about a case like this? We know Lazarus syndrome is real, verified and documented across dozens of countries in serious medical literature, not internet rumor or urban legend. We know there are credible scientific theories involving trapped air pressure in the chest, delayed drug effects, and temporarily stunned heart muscle that can explain many individual cases. What we don't fully know is why it happens to some patients and not others, why the timing varies so dramatically between cases, or why, in this particular story, a second collapse followed so soon after the first with no way to prevent it. This uncertainty is exactly why cases like this continue to change how hospitals approach the moment of death itself. Many emergency departments now build in a mandatory waiting period after resuscitation efforts end, precisely because doctors know, thanks to cases just like the one in this story, that a flat line and silence in the room do not always mean the end has truly arrived. Maybe the biggest mystery here isn't really how one man could die twice in a single day. Maybe it's that even now, with everything modern medicine understands about the human body, science still cannot say with total certainty the exact moment life finally, irreversibly, ends. And until that question is fully answered, rare and haunting stories like this one will keep quietly blurring the line between the living and the dead.